If you're just getting into flash photography, this is by far the best way to make your photographs look so much better. The problem with on-camera flash is that it's aimed in the same direction as you're shooting, so it will give a very flat appearance as that light will hit everything that you see through the lens. So the way around this is to get that flash off camera, and this gives you the opportunity to angle the light in different ways to give you the image a more 3D feel by utilizing highlights and shadows. For off-camera flash photography, you'll need a flash, a trigger, a light stand. Now this can be a person or an actual light stand, a light modifier and a bracket, and obviously the camera. Now if you have a built-in flash and a speed light, you can just take your speed light, set it to slave mode and set your on-camera flash to its minimum amount so it doesn't affect the shot. The speed light will then fire as soon as it sees the flash on the top of your camera firing as well, and it happens in a millisecond. Nowadays you can use a trigger to fire your flash, and this will give you the ability to control the remote flash from your camera without having to go back and forth to your flash until you get the settings right. And you won't need a flash built into your camera either. Both work in a similar way. It just takes longer with the slave mode. Now some flashes say they do off-camera flash, but you might have to buy an additional trigger for your camera, so just be careful in what flash you do buy. Today I have the Godox V862S with my A7 III, and for this to work off camera I did have to buy the X1TS trigger for it to work. Now you might be thinking that there's a wireless flash setting in the camera, so why doesn't it just pair up with that? The trigger basically talks the right language to that flash and then it kind of translates it to your camera. I think a few of you asked about this with the Sony HVL series of flashes. This can be a master and a slave with multiple flash heads, but for just one flash off-camera system, with a camera like the A7 III with no built-in flash to trigger it, you will need the FA-WRC-1M, which is around about $350, which is a ridiculous price for a trigger. All a trigger needs to do really is to let you control the settings of the flash, and sometimes let the flash know what the camera settings are. But that's it. Like I've already said, I have the V862S in a Bowens bracket, the X1TS trigger, the 60cm softbox from Neewer, which includes a grid, and then just a cheap light stand. I got everything for under $350, which is the same price as just that Sony trigger on its own. And this is why the Godox speedlights are really popular, and they're a really good system. They offer a budget-friendly flash system for a fraction of the price. Now for the settings. Indoor is pretty straightforward as you won't have too much ambient light to mess around with those settings. And you can control it with things like curtains or picking a room without any windows at all. And then it's just going to be flash. Today, I do have a big window to my left, which is letting in a bit of light, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Now, if you're on a paid shoot, you do have to have your settings dialed in before the client gets there. But if you're shooting a family member and you're just learning, just get them to chill out whilst you get the settings you want. Now, I've got my camera. I'm going to get the settings dialed in before I even put the trigger on the camera. I'm going to set the ISO to 100, the aperture between 5.6 and f8. I think today I'll probably go with f5.6, and then I'm going to work out how I want that background to look. Now, if you want the background completely black, move as far away from the background as possible to give as much room behind my subject as possible. Then I'm going to set my camera to the max sync speed. If you don't know what that is for your camera, you need to Google it. For my A7 III, it's 1/250th of a second. And if I take a shot, it is completely black. So now I know those settings aren't going to let any ambient light into my frame. I'm going to attach the trigger. So this is going on. I'm going to screw it into place, and I'll turn that on and then just check my flash. Yep, that's working. And it's always good to fire off a test shot before you start using the flash, just so you know they're communicating with each other. If the trigger and the flash aren't talking to each other, just make sure you have the flash in the right mode and as the same channel as that trigger. With the V860 Mark II, press the button on the right hand side until it's in the wireless mode, which is the orange screen with the wireless logo in the top left hand corner. And then I just switch my flash to manual mode. With the channel, you just need to make sure it says the same channel number on the flash as it does on the trigger. I have them both set to channel 1 and group A. Once it fires with the test button on the top of the trigger, I know they're communicating. Right, come on, get up. What you'll find with the Sony cameras is the back of the screen will go from being completely black to you being able to see what's going on in the environment. So it basically turns off live view. If it's a third-party flash or if it's a manual flash that doesn't work with this system, the back of the camera will stay black and you will have to turn off live view display. Now, one of the great things with using one of these triggers is that I can control the power of the flash from the back of this trigger. So it means I don't have to run backwards and forwards to the flash. This might not seem much when the flash is right next to you, but if you have 3 different flashes set up, this works really well and you can control all 3 of them from this trigger. Also, if you're wondering why I'm not using TTL mode, check out my Flash for Beginners video series. I've linked it again in the corner and in the description. I just prefer using manual flash as I get complete control over my flash and over the power it produces. And I have the camera in manual mode as well. So everything's manual, I control everything instead of the camera taking some of that control away from me. Now, getting the flash off camera is the starting point, but you also need to change how the light looks. Soft light is always good, and you have these big light modifiers to help with that. All that does is it changes from that flash being a tiny little square to being this huge square. And this softbox that I've got is 90 centimeters by 60 centimeters. So it really does spread the light and it's really flattering light, especially when you're taking portraits. To position your flash head and softbox, because it's free from your camera, you can put it pretty much wherever you want. Now, what you want to do is experiment with this and try putting it around your subject at different angles. You'll be surprised at how much you can change the look of the shot with small movements of that flash. I tend to put it at around about 45 degrees from the angle that I'm photographing from, and then I'll tilt it down between 20 and 40 degrees. You might have to play around with this to get the angle that you like the most, and it also depends on your subject as well. Different lighting positions work for different height of people and also different shapes of faces as well. Also, to stop any spill light, I am using this grid on the softbox. Now with the flash, I'll set it to 1/4 power and I'll start dialing in the settings from there. I'll get them around about right and then start to fine tune everything as well. So I'll set that to 1/4 power and then I'll just try a shot. So that's really underexposed still. So what I'm going to do is move the flash closer and then just play around with those settings. So straight away that's added a bit more flash power because I've brought the flash closer, but I still need a little bit more. So I'm going to go full power with this V860 just to see what it looks like. That's a bit better, but it is throwing a lot of flash into the background. That's a bit better. And with this grid on, what it does is it stops that light from going right into the background. It's really good for that. Now remember, shutter speed will change the amount of ambient light coming into your camera. Flash power will change the amount of flash in your shot, and then aperture and ISO will change the overall exposure. Now, to give a more interesting portrait, you can introduce a reflector to bounce the light to the back of the head. To achieve this, just put the reflector just out of the shot along the same plane as the flash, so basically where the flash is looking. This will give a little bit of a backlight to your subject, and if you don't have a reflector, you can use a white sheet or a pillowcase. If you have a second flash, you can use that as well. Now, if you want to include some of the background, set the shutter to 1/30th of a second and see what happens. So I'll do that now. I'm going to take it down to 30 and take another shot. So that's introducing a little bit of light, but I am going to have to open that aperture quite a bit. So I'm going to take the aperture to f2.8. That's really brightened up that background, but that flash is really overpowering the shot. So what I'm going to do is change the flash to about 1/8 power. And I'll take another shot. And that is looking really natural and really nice for the light that I have in here. Again, the trick here is to add enough flash light so it adds to the ambient light but doesn't overpower it. You don't want it to look like a flashed shot, You want it to look very natural, so you can see the need to juggle your settings until you get it right. So basically what I just did was bring the shutter speed down to introduce some of the ambient light, and then I changed the overall look to the shot by opening up the aperture. So I went from f8 to f2.8, and then I reduced the flash power from full power, so that's 1/1 to 1/8 power. So I really had to drop that power when I opened up that aperture. Now, another way you can include the background is to put a window behind your subject. This will add to the shot in two ways. One, it'll give an interesting background, and the second point is the ambient light can act as a backlight. And if you balance out that ambient light and flashlight again, this can look very natural. Now, if you want the background to be blurry, shoot with a wider aperture. And if you want more of that background in focus, so you might be doing like an environmental portrait, I'll close the aperture down and increase the ISO instead. When you are shooting outdoors, there'll be a lot more ambient light. If you have a small flash like the TT350, you will have to go out just after sunset. Then, as that ambient light drops, the flash will work better in your photo. But if you have something like the Godox V860 that I'm using today, this should perform well in that daylight and even under bright sunlight. Cloudy days are better, as this will give you less ambient light to compete with and therefore less power needed, which means more flashes per battery pack. We're out in the backyard and it has been pretty sunny today. It was too hot to film earlier on, but I did get a few shots in the midday sun to show you that the V860 can compete with the sun even in this 90cm softbox. The sun has actually just gone behind the mountain in the distance now and I have a lot more power to work with. So if you are struggling with flash power, not being able to compete with the sun, just wait until later in the day towards sunset. Now, as that ambient light has dropped a little, I can underexpose the background even more than I would normally be able to, and then get good light on my subject with this 90cm softbox. And again, because the flash is off camera, I can get that flash angled, I can have it in a softbox, and I can have really nice, soft light on my subject. Now, when you are outdoors, you do need a flash with a lot of power and high-speed sync, so you can use faster shutter speeds. The V860 has both. One thing to note is that with the high-speed sync, once you are over that max sync speed on the A7 III, that is 1/250th of a second, it won't follow those normal flash rules of shutter speed changing the ambient light. When in high-speed sync mode, as the flash duration is longer, the shutter speed will start to affect the amount of flash getting into your camera. So for my A7 III, this will be anything over 1/250th of a second. If it's windy, you'll also need to weigh down the bottom of your light stand. I use my camera bag if it's safe to leave it on the ground, or a sandbag if I've got one handy. Or sometimes I'll just carry the light with me and hold it at 45 degrees to my subject. All depends on what's going on in the environment. For the settings, I keep the flash off and set my camera up for the background exposure. So I'll do that now. I'll switch the flash off and then I'll just get my settings. So first of all, I'll just take a shot of the background with no one in it. So if I do that, I can get a good exposure with the settings at 1/125th of a second, f1.8, ISO 100. So I've got plenty of space to work with in those settings because that ambient light has dropped. All right, if you'd like to get up, cool. So once I've exposed for the background, I'll then turn the flash back on with the trigger. I'll make sure it fires, and then I'll take some shots. So all I need to do in theory is just change the power of the flash. So I'll just take a shot now. So what I'm gonna do is drop my power down a little bit. So it was at full power, but that's too much because it's just chucking in so much light. So I'll try it at a quarter power. That's a little bit better. And then I'll try it at 1/8 power. That's good, still quite a lot of flash in there. So I'm gonna try it at 1/16th power now. That's much better. So 1/16th, 1/125th of a second, f1.8, ISO 100, getting a really nice shot. So you can see outside, it's very much the same process as inside. You expose for your background, then you turn the flash on and then get the flash power to where you want it. You may have to juggle with those settings a little bit, or you may want more flash and less ambient light.
or you want more ambient light and less flash. And you've just got to juggle with those settings. Now, if the person is squinting a lot, get them to look at a bright wall or a bright part of the sky, not the sun, but something brighter than where you are stood. So say I'm stood here, this sky up here is really bright. So I'd get them to look at that bright sky and then look at me. And as soon as they look at me, their eyes will have kind of adjusted to that brighter part and they'll have less of a squint on their face. So this is a nice little tip if your subject is squinting. Now, if the sun's out, you can use that as a second light source, almost as a hair light. So just play around with those settings and see what you can get. You can even try your flash without the softbox to see if you like the hard flash look better. Now, this tends to work better for sports than portraits, but it's a look that you might want to go for. Now, I'm just giving you the basics here, and I've shot these self-portraits really quickly, but you do need to give yourself time to dial in those settings to get the look that you want, and hopefully your model will be a little bit prettier than mine. Now, with flash photography, you can really go in deep, from massive modifiers and more powerful flash units to multiple flash heads. But how far you take it is up to you. But know that you can get a decent headshot with just one flash and a little bit of ingenuity.
The main thing is to keep practicing as much as possible. Now, before COVID, I had so many corporate head shoots that I could pretty much walk into a room and work out how to shoot it before it even set up. But now I am a little bit rusty, so keeping on practicing is so important. Now, if you're unsure of what settings to use, or all of the different settings just confuse you completely when it comes to flash photography, you need to watch this next video now. In it, I go over exactly how I set up my camera and flash from scratch, and how you can gain control over your flash instead of it looking really unnatural and like very much a flashed shot.